What if the story you were taught was never the beginning, but only the debris left after something far older was deliberately erased? Imagine history not as a timeline, but as a shattered mirror, one where every surviving fragment reflects only what someone long before you allowed to remain. Beneath the familiar tales of ancient floods, vanished kingdoms, and wandering gods lies an older architecture of memory, a hidden scaffolding built by beings whose decisions reshaped the fate of the world long before the first human city rose from the mud. And in the shadows of that forgotten age, a conflict unfolded not between myths, but between powers who argued over the value of humanity itself, weighing our survival against the cold logic of cosmic law. Across deserts, drowned valleys, and mountains carved by forces no human hand ever touched, the echoes of that struggle still tremble like distant thunder. The tablets that survived, those etched in clay, locked in stone, or whispered across generations, hint at councils in the sky, oaths sworn in silence, and a world-ending deluge that was not fate, but a decision. A decision contested, concealed, and carried out with a severity that left even its architects haunted. When the waters rose, civilizations were not merely washed away. Memories were uprooted, rewritten, replanted like seeds in the dark. And everything we think we know today stands on top of those buried roots, unaware of the deeper story stirring beneath. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. In the quiet before the world broke, when the sky still felt close enough for the gods to touch, and the earth hummed with a rhythm older than memory, the great assembly gathered in a place where no human had ever stood. The air trembled with tension. Voices that shaped mountains and stirred oceans rose and collided like storms in the upper sky. These were not the distant abstractions of myth, but living beings bound by blood, loyalty, rivalry, and the crushing weight of destiny. Across the stone floor, Enlil's gaze carried the cold certainty of a judge who believed destruction was the only remedy for disorder. Opposite him, Enki, the patient architect of life, held a different truth in his eyes, a truth born from compassion for a fragile creature he had helped design and loved in ways he could never confess aloud. Between them, the fate of humanity rested like a fragile reed drifting between two currents. The decision had already been made in chambers unseen by mortals. A deluge would come, not as punishment from a temperamental sky, but as a calculated reset, a cleansing tide meant to erase the mistakes no one wished to claim. Those who stood in that sacred hall, lords of planets, stewards of stars, overseers of ancient bloodlines, swore an oath of silence, one that tasted of fear more than duty. And as the oath was spoken, the atmosphere thickened like a gathering storm. Some lowered their heads in reluctant obedience. Others embraced the decree with the fierce conviction of soldiers following a command they dared not question. Enlil's voice boomed through the chamber like a falling hammer, declaring that the earthlings, with all their passions, flaws, and unpredictable brilliance, had drifted too far from their purpose. They had become uncontrollable, unpredictable, too full of will, a dangerous fire in hands not yet ready to hold it. But Enki, who had shaped the first humans with the delicate precision of an artist carving life from clay, stood unmoved. His defiance simmered beneath a veneer of calm. He reminded Enlil that the very traits now condemned, curiosity, desire, the hunger for meaning, were not defects, but gifts planted by their own hands. He spoke of Adapa, the crafted one whose the understanding surpassed expectation, whose lineage had grown into branches too complex to prune. He spoke of the earthborn children, the mixtures of divine and mortal blood, whose existence blurred the line between creation and creator. But for every argument he raised, Enlil countered with accusations etched in the bitterness of old wounds. He blamed Enki for breaking sacred boundaries, for giving humans knowledge they were never meant to hold, for allowing mingling between realms that should have remained separate. One by one, others took sides, their voices echoing through the corridor of time. Ninmar, the life-giver, whose hands had shaped humanity alongside Enki's, stepped forward with quiet courage. Her voice, steady as the heartbeat of the earth, pronounced her loyalty not to decrees, but to the beings she had fashioned with her own breath. "My work is here," she said, her words trembling with a painful pride. "I will not abandon what I have made." Her declaration struck the assembly like a thunderclap. Some recoiled in shock. Others felt old loyalties stir beneath the weight of dread. It was a moment that revealed the raw truth. This was not merely a matter of cosmic policy, but a family dispute, a fracture between siblings whose disagreements had shaped worlds. Yet the decree stood. The deluge would come. It was no longer a matter of if, but when. And once that truth settled over the assembly, the mood shifted from debate to preparation. The corridors buzzed with activity as those aligned with Enlil's camp readied their ascent to the heavens, leaving behind the world they believed doomed. They prepared celestial chariots that shimmered with the glow of distant stars, crafts that could outrun the rising waters and watch the destruction unfold from safety above. The ones who would stay, those who believed survival and memory were worth protecting, turned toward the mountains, gathering supplies, calculating refuge, whispering plans behind closed doors. Among them, Marduk burned with restless anger. His voice, filled with wounded pride, echoed through the halls as he challenged his father Enki for answers, for reassurance, for a promise amid the chaos brewing around them. The decision fractured more than alliances. It shattered families. Lovers were divided, children torn from parents, brothers forced to choose between obedience and conscience. On the night before the sky began its violent trembling, as the ground groaned beneath unseen forces, Enki walked alone through the quieted halls of his domain. His mind carried the weight of an impossible choice: uphold the vow of silence, or protect the fragile beings who had inherited both the flaws and wonder of the divine. The dream came to him like a whisper in the dark. A messenger not bound by the council materialized in a glimmer of blue light, carrying a tablet carved from lapis that gleamed like frozen night. The figure's message was not one of rebellion, but of destiny. What was about to happen, he said, was written not by Enlil's hand, but by the deeper laws of fate. Humanity must not perish. One must survive, not by breaking the oath directly, but by bending its edges until light seeped through. When Enki awoke, trembling with the certainty that the dream wasn't merely a dream, the tablet was there beside his bed, solid, cold, impossible to dismiss. Its etched design revealed a vessel unlike any creation of men, a submersible ark capable of rolling with the waves, shielded from the crushing force of the incoming waters. He understood then that the only path forward was a whisper, not a shout. He could not speak directly to his chosen human, Ziusudra, without shattering the oath, but he could speak to the walls of the reed hut and let the wall carry the meaning. So he stood behind the woven barrier, his voice soft yet urgent, telling the wall of the coming storm, the rising waters, the design of the vessel, the instruction to hide from the eyes of the sky. The wall trembled as if listening. In the shadows, the man inside awoke, startled by the voice that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Ziusudra listened, not as a servant obeying a master, but as a wise man recognizing the tremor of destiny. He understood that a departure was required, not as a rebellion against the gods, but as a gesture of obedience to a quieter truth beneath their conflict. When he stepped outside into the pale morning light and found the lapis tablet resting in the reeds, he knew the message was not born of trickery or illusion. He gathered his people and declared that Enlil was displeased, that he must leave the city to restore harmony, and that they must help him build the vessel quickly. The people, desperate to ease divine wrath, worked with a feverish devotion. Wood was carried from distant marshes, pitch was melted in great pots, planks were hammered with rhythmic determination. Birds circled overhead as if guided by instinct. Animals, sensing something vast and unstoppable, lingered near the construction site as if awaiting their place in the vessel. The ark rose not as a symbol of defiance, but as a testament to the human spirit, its fragility, and its relentless will to endure. By the 6th day, all was ready. Ninagal, master of the great waters, arrived carrying a cedarwood chest filled with the essences and life eggs of species gathered by Ninmar and Enki. These fragile seeds of survival held within them the memory of the world before the flood, a memory waiting to be reborn if the earth allowed it. When the 7th day dawned, the horizon darkened unnaturally. A low rumble rolled across the land, followed by a silence so heavy it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Then a roar, deeper than thunder, sharper than lightning, split the sky. Mountains groaned. The ice of the far south cracked like glass struck by a celestial hammer. The first wall of water rose, impossibly tall, lit by flashes of sickly green light reflecting off the distant silhouette of Nibiru as it neared its fateful crossing. High above, the Anunnaki boarded their sky chariots, their faces pale as they watched the catastrophe unfold. Some cried out in grief, not for themselves, but for the life below. Life they had shaped, nurtured, and now condemned. Others watched with cold resignation, believing destruction was necessary purification. The vessel sealed shut. Inside, Ziusudra held his family close as the ark lurched violently. Water slammed against its sides with the fury of 1,000 storms. Outside, cities crumbled, forests vanished beneath churning waves, and mountains disappeared into the collapsing horizon. The cries of humanity were drowned in a roar so immense it shook the memory of the world. For 7 days and nights the waters rose, swirling with debris from civilizations erased in moments. Even the Anunnaki, safe in orbit, wept at the sight of a world transformed into a single, endless sea. They lamented the loss of creatures they had loved, cursed themselves for choices they had made, and whispered prayers to the forces greater than even their own power. Yet amid the devastation, the vessel endured, floating like a solitary heartbeat in an ocean made of sorrow. The world that emerged after the flood wasn't the one that had drowned. It was younger, rawer, shaped by mud and silence. Life would return, but slowly, carrying within it the scars of what had been lost. The gods would descend again, but they would carry a new understanding, one forged through destruction, grief, and the faint glimmer of hope glowing from the vessel resting upon the mountains. In that silence, Enlil and Enki would meet again, not as conqueror and rebel, but as brothers forced to confront the price of their choices. And humanity, fragile yet unbroken, would step onto the trembling earth, ready to rebuild a world it never knew had once been taken from it. When the waters finally stopped their furious ascent, and the sky softened from the color of bruised steel to a pale, washed-out gold, the world lay still beneath a silence that felt older than memory. The vessel that had endured the wrath of the deluge drifted across the endless expanse like a lone star on a drowned horizon. Inside, Ziusudra stirred from uneasy sleep, his ears ringing not from thunder, but from the sudden quiet that followed days of unrelenting chaos. He rose cautiously, as if afraid that any abrupt movement might anger the storm gods lingering beyond the sealed walls. His family watched him with hollow eyes, eyes that carried fear, gratitude, and the echo of everything they had lost. The navigator Ninagal crouched near the hatch, listening to the faint hum of the outside world, trying to sense whether the waters had calmed enough to make the next move. In that suspended breath between destruction and survival, time itself felt uncertain, as though the earth was deciding whether to begin again or slip back into the darkness that had swallowed so much. Ziusudra approached the sealed hatch with trembling hands. He pressed his ear against the wood, listening not for voices, but for the absence of the storm's rage. When he lifted the latch and pushed, a sliver of cold light pierced the gloom inside the vessel. It wasn't the warm glow of a sunrise, he remembered. It was thin, hesitant, as though the sun itself was unsure of its place in this newborn world. The breeze carried the scent of salt and wet stone, and when Ziusudra stepped out onto the deck, he inhaled deeply, letting the enormity of the moment settle in his chest. Around him stretched a vast ocean, calm now, but filled with the debris of civilizations vanished beneath the waves. Broken pieces of homes, shattered beams of ancient temples, fragments of cities that once thrived, all drifted across the water like ghosts searching for the land that no longer existed. Even the air felt different, as if the storm had stripped away something intangible, leaving behind a world smoother, emptier, waiting to be carved anew. Above them, high in the sky, the Anunnaki hovered in their celestial vessels, observing the aftermath with mixed emotions that rippled through their ranks like the uncertain currents below. Enlil stood rigid, his gaze locked on the barren expanse, trying to reconcile the harsh justice he believed necessary with the reality of what lay before him. The world looked less like a cleansed canvas and more like a graveyard. For a moment, his certainty wavered. Had the destruction gone too far? Had the cost exceeded the sin? These questions flickered in his mind, but pride, duty, and the weight of leadership pressed against them like a stone wall. Beside him, Ninmar wept openly, unable to hide the grief that tore through her heart. Her creations, those she had molded with care, shaped with intention, nurtured with hope, were gone. Her hands trembled as she imagined thousands of lives extinguished, not by their own choices, but by a decree she had silently opposed. Enki, watching her from another vessel, carried his own burden of sorrow. Though Ziusudra and a handful of life would survive, he could not ignore the vastness of the loss. Life had been entrusted to him, and now much of it lay broken beneath the waves. The celestial ships circled the earth for days, waiting for the waters to recede enough to allow descent. They monitored shifting currents, tracked the emergence of mountain peaks, and listened to the faint hum of the planet as it strained to heal itself. The once fertile plains of Eden were gone. Cities like Eridu, Sippar, and Shurupak lay buried under mountains of silt. Forests that had stood for thousands of years were reduced to drifting remnants. Yet, in the midst of the devastation, the earth began to show signs of resilience. Mountain ranges emerged, their peaks cutting through the water like jagged teeth. Rivers began to carve new paths through the soft mud, and as the days turned into weeks, the ocean slowly retreated, revealing a world transformed but not defeated. In the vessel, Ziusudra released a dove into the sky, watching with hope as it fluttered away across the soft wind. He waited, heart pounding, but when it returned with empty claws, doubt gnawed at him. The next day, he released a swallow, its wings slicing through the breeze with quiet determination. It too returned without sign of land. But on the third day, when he released a dove again, it returned with a small branch clutched between its feathers, a fragile symbol of rebirth. Ziusudra held the branch as though it were a piece of the earth's soul, a sign that the world had not given up on itself. The people inside the vessel cried with relief, not from joy alone, but from the dawning realization that they had not survived to drift forever. They had survived to rebuild. When the waters finally lowered enough, the vessel struck ground against the rocky slopes of distant peaks. The mountains were known to the Anunnaki, a sacred range that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless eras. Ninigel guided the vessel to rest upon a safe ridge. And when the hatch opened again, Ziusudra and his family stepped out onto solid earth for the first time since the deluge began. The ground felt strange beneath their feet, soft, unstable, molded by freshly settled mud. But it was solid, and that was enough. Ziusudra knelt, kissing the damp soil, whispering words of gratitude to the unseen forces that had carried them through. From the sky, Enki descended in a whirlwind of light, landing near the vessel with a mixture of reverence and grief. His eyes softened when he saw Ziusudra and his family alive, breathing, trembling, but whole. Enlil descended soon after, though his arrival carried none of the gentle warmth of Enki's presence. His first emotion upon seeing humans alive, humans who should not have survived according to the decree, was rage. He stared in disbelief, demanding to know who had broken the oath. But when Enki stepped forward and spoke of dreams, fate, and the whispers of a higher will, Enlil's rage faltered. The truth was undeniable. Something beyond their control had guided events. Something older than their councils, older than their laws, older even than the ancient bond between their worlds. With reluctance carved deep into his voice, Enlil stepped forward and blessed Ziusudra and his wife, acknowledging that life would continue through them. His touch was heavy, as though the blessing itself weighed upon him like a stone. Ninmar, unable to contain her joy, embraced Ziusudra with trembling arms, whispering promises of renewal, of guidance, of hope buried beneath loss. It was she who had given life to humanity once, and now she would help nurture it again. As the earth continued to reshape itself, the Anunnaki turned to the monumental task of restoring order. Enlil commanded his sons to search the mountains for fertile land, for remnants of fruit-bearing trees, for places where humans could once again plant their feet and grow. Ninurta journeyed across the newly revealed slopes, mapping out terraces where grains from Nibiru, preserved in crystal vaults, could be sown again. Ekur searched for ancient riverbeds where the waters had thinned enough to allow fruit trees to take root. In the vast stretches of land between the mountains and the sea, the remains of animals rescued through the life essence chests were nurtured into new herds. Sheep, cattle, birds, and creatures that had once roamed the world freely began to repopulate the landscape, guided by careful cultivation and divine intervention. But even as they labored to rebuild, the Anunnaki discovered a troubling truth. Much of the knowledge, craft, and infrastructure that once supported their connection to Nibiru had been lost in the flood. Mines that had supplied precious metals were buried under mountains of silt or drowned beneath new rivers. Ancient platforms, once used for celestial navigation, were shattered. And the old cities, those places where heaven and earth had once touched, were now unrecognizable. This realization stirred a new urgency among them. Nibiru's atmosphere was weakening again. The shield of gold dust, designed to protect their world from environmental decay, required replenishment. Without gold, their home would wither. The survival of their civilization depended on the recovery of new resources, and with much of the old world swept away, they were forced to search farther than ever before. It was Ninurta who brought the first spark of hope. While exploring lands beyond the seas, he discovered that the deluge, in its violent fury, had exposed veins of pure gold in the mountains, gold so plentiful that mining was almost unnecessary. These regions, untouched by the destruction that had drowned the continents, seemed like a gift from fate itself. Enlil and Enki traveled there, marveling at the abundance. The rivers sparkled with golden sands, the mountain slopes glittered under the sun, and for the first time since the flood, a wave of relief washed through the assembly. Perhaps the destruction had carved a path for renewal after all. Yet with every new beginning came tension. The surviving humans were few, scattered across highlands and isolated peaks. Some were descendants of Cain's lineage, skilled in metalwork and guardianship, living on mountain islands surrounded by newly formed lakes. These groups, though small, would play a crucial role in collecting and processing the precious metals needed to restore the bond between the two worlds. But with survival came ambition, and with ambition came conflict. The fragile peace forged in the aftermath of the deluge began to strain under the weight of competing interests. Marduk, Enki's firstborn, watched as territories were divided and dominions re-established. Though he had obeyed the command to stand down during the flood, his pride simmered beneath the surface. He saw lands allocated to others, honors bestowed on those he considered rivals. His own future seemed uncertain, overshadowed by the judgment of those who feared his growing influence. The tension that smoldered beneath the surface would soon erupt, but for now, the Anunnaki focused on rebuilding the foundation of civilization. New centers of power were established, sacred platforms where the connection between heaven and earth could be restored. terraces where agriculture could flourish anew, settlements where humans could be guided and shaped once more. Enki, ever the patient craftsman, worked tirelessly to ensure that humanity would not merely survive, but grow into something stronger than before. He taught Ziusudra's sons the secrets of farming, metallurgy, and stewardship. Ninmar nurtured the healing of animals and the resurrection of lost species. Even Enlil, stern and unwavering, recognized that the world needed guidance, not domination, if it was to rise again without falling into the chaos he so feared. Under their watch, the first shoots of new civilization began to pierce through the mud. Simple shelters gave way to villages. Villages grew into enclaves. Paths formed between settlements, as humans once again dared to explore beyond the horizon. And though the scars of the deluge ran deep, they also carved a framework for renewal, one that the Anunnaki would shape, manipulate, and protect as the world found its footing again. But destiny is never content to rest in one place. It shifts, coils, and prepares for its next movement. And as the world healed, the shadows of old ambitions stirred once more, rising with the same inevitability as the floodwaters that had just receded. The seeds of conflict, buried beneath grief, duty, and fragile alliances, were beginning to crack open, and the world that had barely survived one catastrophe was unknowingly drifting toward another. In the first dawns after the deluge, when the earth was still young with silt and trembling beneath the weight of its rebirth, a strange quiet hung over the world. It was the kind of quiet that settles not from peace, but from exhaustion, like a deep breath held by the land itself, unsure of what will come next. The Anunnaki walked among the mountains and ravines, observing how the waters had carved new shapes into the bones of the planet. Valleys appeared where none had existed. Rivers bent in unfamiliar routes, as if guided by invisible hands. Entire continents seemed rearranged, like pieces of a puzzle shaken by a cosmic force. In this reshaped world, the remnants of what once was lay buried beneath layers of mud so thick that even memory struggled to pass through them. Yet life, stubborn and resilient, began to pulse again. Birds returned to the skies in small clusters, their wings cutting through the mist that still clung to the higher peaks. Insects crawled over stones warmed by the timid sunlight. Shoots of green pierced through the softened earth, reaching toward a sky that watched them with cautious hope. Ziusudra and his family settled near the mountain slopes, creating a small refuge from the desolation that surrounded them. They fashioned tools from fallen branches and gathered stones, working with the determination of people who knew that the survival of their kind depended on their endurance. At night they would sit beneath the stars that looked sharper now, clearer, as if the heavens themselves had been washed clean. Ziusudra would tell his sons stories of the world before the waters, describing fields of barley, cities filled with song, and rivers that brought abundance rather than fear. These stories became their inheritance, knowledge shaped not by books or tablets, but by memory carried through a voice trembling with longing. The Anunnaki, meanwhile, convened in the highlands to assess what remained of their ancient works. Enlil stood at the edge of a deep valley, looking down at the remnants of a once great city now buried under layers of mud. Nothing remained of its towers or temples except the faint trace of geometric outlines visible in the sediment. It was a grave, the grave of an age he had ended. Enki joined him, his expression unreadable. though their rivalry often simmered beneath every exchange. In that moment they shared a somber stillness. Enlil's voice, when it came, was unusually soft. He admitted that the destruction had been greater than he imagined, that even the heavens, watching from above, had trembled in horror at the collapse of so much life. Enki did not answer directly. Instead, he placed a hand on the earth, feeling its vibration as if listening for the whisper of its spirit. "It will heal," he said quietly, "but it will never forget." That truth echoed across the council chambers as the Anunnaki gathered to discuss the future. The world needed order, structure, and guidance. Humans were few, scattered, and vulnerable. Without leadership, they would slip into chaos or vanish entirely. Enlil demanded that the regions of the earth be divided according to lineage and expertise, ensuring that each area would be governed with a deliberate purpose. Enki agreed, but insisted that humanity must be nurtured, not ruled with an iron fist. Ninmar supported him, her heart still heavy with the memory of the lives lost. She reminded the assembly that humanity had been crafted not as slaves, but as beings with potential to mirror the divine spark. Her words, spoken with the calm of someone who understood both creation and loss, softened even Enlil's stern resolve. But while the elders debated the architecture of the new world, younger eyes watched with restless ambition. Marduk, still stung by what he perceived as injustices, observed the restructuring with a smoldering anger. He felt sidelined, relegated to distant regions while others claimed prime lands. His resentment was not born solely of pride. He believed deeply that he was destined for greatness, for leadership, for a legacy that would carve his name into the foundations of the new era. Every decision that excluded him felt like a deliberate blow, a denial of the future he believed fate had promised him. His allies among the younger Anunnaki whispered encouragements, fanning the flames of dissatisfaction that flickered beneath his calm exterior. Ninurta, Enlil's warrior son, sensed the rising tension and kept a vigilant eye on Marduk. He knew that ambition, when mixed with wounded pride, could become the spark that ignited another catastrophe. Yet even he could not prevent the slow brewing of conflict that seeped like smoke into the cracks of their fragile peace. Among the humans who had survived, word began to spread of divine beings choosing sides, of factions forming among the gods themselves. Rumors, born from fear and wonder, intertwined with the stories Ziusudra told his family, shaping the mythology of an age still too young to understand the storm gathering in its shadows. As the land dried, the Anunnaki began rebuilding their sacred sites. In the mountains where the deluge had spared only fragments, they carved platforms of stone, aligning them with the paths of the stars. From these heights, they intended to restore the connection between earth and the heavens. Enki worked tirelessly, designing irrigation systems and channels that would bring water from the high lakes into the valleys below. With his guidance, Ziusudra's descendants learned how to cultivate grain, how to tend livestock, and how to shape clay into vessels that held the essence of their renewed civilization. Every act of creation felt like a quiet defiance against the destruction that had nearly ended them. Yet as humanity found its footing, the invisible threads of destiny tugged at the factions within the Anunnaki. The descendants of Cain, skilled metalworkers who had survived in distant refuges, journeyed to the new settlements, offering their expertise in shaping tools, ornaments, and weapons. Their presence unsettled some of the Anunnaki, especially those who remembered the ancient conflicts that had divided humans long before the flood. But their skill with metals also made them valuable allies in the effort to collect gold. And gold, more than aspirations, more than rivalries, was what Nibiru needed above all. The survival of their home depended on the flow of gold dust that kept its atmosphere breathable, its climate stable. Without it, even the mightiest of the Anunnaki would have no home to return to. It was during one of these expeditions in the distant highlands that Ninurta made his remarkable discovery. The mountains beyond the seas, untouched by the deluge's crushing weight, held vast deposits of pure gold scattered across their ravines. It seemed as though the flood itself had torn open the earth, revealing riches that had lain hidden for ages. Rivers glimmered with flecks of gold, and stones sparkled as if infused with sunlight. The news spread quickly, reigniting hope among the Anunnaki and bringing a renewed sense of purpose to their rebuilding efforts. Even Enlil smiled when he heard the report, recognizing that this discovery could stabilize the fragile accord between Earth and Nibiru. But not everyone celebrated. Marduk saw the discovery as an opportunity, one that could either elevate him or further entrench him in obscurity. He pressed for authority over the new lands, arguing that his lineage and strength made him the rightful overseer. Enlil resisted, insisting that leadership required wisdom, not impatience. Enki defended his son, reminding the assembly that Marduk had a vision, a drive that could benefit their mission. But old wounds, old rivalries, and the weight of the deluge's aftermath made the elders cautious. They assigned the territories carefully, ensuring balance but unintentionally deepening the fissure in Marduk's pride. As months passed, the Anunnaki turned their attention to constructing new facilities, places where celestial vessels could land, where communications with Nibiru could be restored, where the flow of gold could be monitored and processed. In the high mesas and plains, they built structures that shimmered with an otherworldly precision. Towering monoliths rose from the earth, aligned to the movement of the heavens. These were not mere buildings. They were instruments of power, designed to bind the world to the divine order. But while the elders built monuments, whispers filled the corridors of their hidden chambers. The Igigi, once loyal watchers stationed in the skies, now uneasy with their diminished roles, spoke of freedom, of claiming their place on earth among humans. Some had taken human wives, creating lineages that carried both divine and mortal blood. These unions had been one of the reasons for Enlil's fury before the flood, and now the seeds of that forbidden legacy sprouted in unexpected places. Children born of these unions grew faster, stronger, more perceptive than ordinary humans. Their existence unsettled the balance within the Anunnaki Council. Some viewed them as abominations. Others saw them as the next evolutionary step, a new kind of being shaped from the merging of two worlds. One of these children, a young man named Huron, grew under the protective guidance of Gebel, Enki's son. Gebel, a master of fire and metallurgy, taught the boy the secrets of forging metal and wielding tools that glowed like fragments of the sun. Huron learned with remarkable speed, mastering skills that even seasoned shepherds and craftsmen marveled at. His agility, strength, and intuition set him apart. When he climbed mountains, he moved as though guided by invisible paths. When he looked at the stars, He seemed to understand something unspoken in their patterns. Enki watched him with quiet curiosity. Ninmar observed him with a mixture of concern and hope. But others, especially the Igigi, who feared being overshadowed, watched him with suspicion. As Haran grew, Marduk's frustrations reached their breaking point. Driven by a belief that destiny had denied him his rightful power, he began gathering allies among the discontented. The Igigi, emboldened by whispers of rebellion, rallied behind him. They claimed that the earth should be ruled by those who had lived among humans, not by distant lords who soared above in celestial vessels. Marduk, fueled by resentment and ambition, encouraged their sentiments. He promised them freedom, honor, and dominion. And though he spoke of unity, his words carried the subtle venom of division. The first cracks of conflict appeared like faint tremors beneath the surface. A dispute broke out over land claimed by both Marduk's supporters and the followers of Enlil. Tempers flared. Words turned to shouts. Shouts turned to blows. And soon the air buzzed with tension that could ignite into warfare with the slightest spark. The Anunnaki Council sensed the rising storm, but their attempts to mediate were hindered by old grudges, by roles inherited from ages long past, by a web of loyalties too tangled to unravel quickly. In the midst of this brewing chaos, Inanna, granddaughter of Enlil, watched events unfold with eyes that shimmered like the morning star. She was fierce, intelligent, and ambitious in her own right. She had survived the deluge with a heart that refused to bow to despair, and she envisioned a future where she played a central role in shaping humanity's destiny. Her beauty and power drew admiration and fear alike. And though she had found love once with Dumuzi, Enki's son, that love had ended in tragedy, a tragedy that she still carried like a wound carved into her soul. She saw in Marduk not just a rival, but a threat to the delicate balance she hoped to maintain, and Marduk, in turn, saw her as a beacon of influence that challenged his rising authority. When word spread that Marduk was forming alliances across distant regions, gathering strength in the shadows, Inanna understood that conflict was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. The deluge had ended one world, but the next was already trembling under the weight of ambitions, resentments, and unresolved destinies. Humanity, still fragile and struggling to rebuild, found itself caught between divine tensions that threatened to shape its future as violently as the waters that had swallowed its past. As the stars wheeled overhead, marking the passage of time in silent arcs, the world stood on the threshold of another transformation. The flood had carved the earth anew. Now the gods' conflict would carve the fate of humanity, shaping its kingdoms, its myths, its wars, and its legacy for ages to come. And in the heart of that looming storm, the fragile threads of destiny began to tighten, readying themselves for the next great upheaval. The world after the deluge was still trembling into its new shape, when the next great fracture in the destiny of gods and humans began to open. The mountains that had stood as islands during the flooding now formed spines of refuge and rebirth. Valleys, once drowned in silt and sorrow, slowly began to green with the courage of new life. But while nature moved with the slow patience of healing, the hearts of the divine moved with the restless heat of ambition, rivalry, and unresolved grief. What the waters had erased, pride now threatened to shatter again. Inanna felt this more keenly than most. Her heart, once filled with the warmth of love and promise, now carried the cold edge of a wound that refused to heal. Dumuzi's death, violent, senseless, and intertwined with the tangled schemes of gods and mortals, had carved a fissure inside her that neither time nor reason could seal. She walked the high terraces built after the flood, with a beauty that glowed like a star, and a fury that hummed beneath her skin like a storm waiting for its first thunderclap. When she gazed upon the new settlements taking shape at the foot of the mountains, she saw not merely fields of barley and flocks of sheep, but the fragile threads of a world trying to rise from its knees. And she knew, with a clarity sharpened by loss, that this renewed world would not survive the ambitions swirling through the ranks of the Anunnaki, unless someone seized control of destiny before it shattered again. Below her, Ziusudra's growing clans tended to their recovery. Families built homes from reeds and clay. Children played in the shadow of terraces carved by Ninurta's command. Shepherds grazed their animals on slopes Inanna herself had once flown over with Dumuzi. Though they did not know the full truth of the flood, they sensed that the gods were watching more closely now, as if expecting something from them. Every sunrise carried possibility, every night carried whispers, and among those whispers, rumors of discord in the heavens drifted like smoke from a distant fire. Enki, ever the patient architect of life, observed these tensions with a mind sharpened by caution. He understood that the world, though reborn, was fragile. Even more fragile now that the gods themselves had been fractured by grief and rivalry. His sons worked across different lands, Gibel perfecting metals, Ninagal refining water systems, and Marduk, restless Marduk gathering followers in stolen whispers. Enki knew that if the world was to avoid another catastrophe, a balance must be restored, one that did not rely solely on decrees or ancient oaths, but on wisdom. Yet wisdom was a scarce commodity in an age defined by pride, scars, and unspoken fury. Marduk's ambitions grew like fire beneath the sand, hidden, hot, and waiting for air. He believed that leadership had been stolen from him, that the gods who assigned new regions after the deluge had underestimated his strength and dismissed his birthright. His followers, many of them Igigi who had intermarried with humans, fed his belief. They whispered that he was destined to be king of the earth, that his bloodline, mixed with both divine heritage and human resilience, was uniquely positioned to rule the new age. Marduk listened, and every whisper drove a deeper wedge between him and the elder gods who sought to restrain him. Even as Marduk's influence spread, other tensions simmered. The alliances forged after the flood were tenuous at best. Enlil's faction, the Enlilites, worked tirelessly to restore order, building new sacred centers aligned with the stars. These were not mere temples. They were cosmic instruments, designed to channel the paths of the heavens into the cycles of the earth. Enlil believed that only through strict order could the world avoid another descent into chaos. His son Ninurta reinforced this structure with the vigilance of a warrior, his presence alone enough to make lesser gods and mortals alike hesitate before challenging the divine order. But structure without compassion breeds rebellion, and rebellion without guidance breeds destruction. Humanity, still young and desperate, clung to whichever god offered favor, sometimes without understanding the deeper currents of divine conflict beneath those blessings. Shepherds invoked Inanna for fertility. Metalworkers honored Gibel for fire and craft. Hunters prayed to Ekur for storms that brought rain instead of ruin. And far in the mountains, the descendants of the Igigi whispered the name of Marduk, with reverence and defiance in equal measure. Among these scattered humans walked a figure who would soon become a hinge on which destiny turned: Huran. He was no ordinary man. Born from the mingling of a divine bloodline and human lineage, Huran carried an intensity and strength that made him stand apart. Gibbel had guided him through the arts of crafting and fire, teaching him how metals behaved like living things under the right conditions. Under Gibbel's tutelage, Huran learned to understand the language of flame, the pulse of earth, the breath of molten ore. He also inherited ambition born not from arrogance, but from the desire to protect his people who lived in the shadow of divine conflict. Marduk saw in Huran both a potential ally and a potential threat. He admired the young man's courage but feared his growing influence. Huran was becoming a symbol among the human settlements, a hero shaped not by divine decree, but by his own deeds. His people followed him willingly, not out of fear, but out of respect. And where humans gathered around a leader of their choosing, gods felt their authority slipping. Marduk, feeling his own hopes of leadership threatened, began crafting plans that entwined ambition with necessity. It began subtly, with disputes over land boundaries, access to water, and claims to new metal-rich regions. What might have remained simple disagreements quickly escalated as divine loyalties were invoked. Humans aligned themselves with gods whose favor seemed most beneficial. Lines were drawn, lines that would soon resemble fault lines beneath a trembling earth. One such fracture emerged in the region near the ancient landing place where celestial vessels once soared between heaven and earth. Though the structures had been damaged by the deluge, the Igigi claimed this region as their ancestral right. Enlil's followers disagreed, insisting that the sacred territory belonged under their oversight to maintain cosmic order. Heated words escalated into threats. Threats escalated into skirmishes. And though these early clashes were small, they sent tremors through the divine ranks. The gods sensed the shift. Inanna felt it in the vibration of the winds that carried her skyship. Enlil sensed it in the murmurs of the soldiers who guarded the sacred sites. Enki sensed it in the tension of the very soil beneath his feet. And Marduk sensed it in the hopeful eyes of the followers who looked to him for leadership. The conflict finally ignited when a dispute between two divine brothers, Asar and Satu, descendants of the Igigi, escalated into tragedy. Satu, influenced by whispers and fear that Asar would claim dominion over their homeland, plotted a feast to lull his brother into vulnerability. Under the guise of celebration, he offered Asar wine mixed with potent elixirs until the young man collapsed. In a moment that would echo through future myths as the first divine betrayal after the flood, Satu sealed Asar's unconscious body in a coffin and cast it into the waters, hoping the currents would hide the evidence of his treachery. But the waters carried the coffin to the shores of dark lands ruled by Marduk. When the coffin was discovered and opened, Asar's lifeless body lay inside, his face pale, his limbs stiff, his breath extinguished. Marduk's grief exploded like wildfire. His wife wailed, his mother lamented, and Enki, whose heart had already been scarred by the loss of Dumuzi, cried out in anguish at the cruel symmetry of fate. Death had taken another young god, another son whose life should have been long and radiant. Asar's sister Astar, driven by grief and fury, sought vengeance not through violence, but through creation. Before Asar's body was laid to rest, she took from him the seed that could carry his lineage forward, the last spark of his life that had not yet dimmed. She concealed it, nurtured it, and brought forth a son, Huran. A child born not merely of divine lineage, but of love, revenge, and destiny intertwined. Huran, raised in secret, grew under the guidance of Gibel and other allies, never knowing the full truth of his birth until his strength and wisdom surpassed that of many older gods. When Huran came of age, he confronted Satu, not with secrecy, but in open challenge. Satu, hardened by guilt and fear, met him in aerial combat above the sacred territory of Tilmun. The sky crackled with energy as their weapons clashed. Satu wielded poisoned arrows. Huran, empowered by Gibel's flame-forged tools, countered with precision. The battle ended when Huran struck Satu from the sky, breaking his flight and blinding him in one eye. The divine council intervened, sparing Satu's life but stripping him of dignity. He stood humiliated, injured, and bound by consequences he could no longer escape. This victory marked Huran as a hero in the eyes of many humans and gods alike. But for the Anunnaki Council, it was a warning. Divine blood spilled by divine hands was an omen of something deeper, a sign that the order established after the flood was unraveling. And as they looked across the lands, they saw walls dividing loyalties, not uniting them. Inanna, recognizing the gravity of this shift, vowed that Marduk, whose influence lay at the heart of many rising tensions, must be held accountable. She believed that peace could only be restored if justice was served, if the ambitions that threatened to engulf the world were contained. Her pursuit of justice, however, was colored by her grief for Dumuzi. She saw in Marduk not only a rival, but a symbol of the forces that had taken her beloved from her. Enki, torn between loyalty to his son and understanding of the chaos swelling around them, sought compromise. But compromise became impossible when another blow struck, a blow that shattered the remnants of peace like a precious vessel dropped upon stone. Dumuzi's death. Not through battle, not through age, but through fear, accident, and fate's merciless hand. In a desperate attempt to escape those who sought to capture him in the aftermath of rising enmity, he fled into treacherous terrain. Waterfalls roared beneath him. Slippery stones glistened like hidden traps. And in one misstep, he fell, carried away by the currents that had once carried the coffins of others. When his lifeless body was found in the frothing waters, the world seemed to inhale sharply and hold its breath. Inanna's grief surged into a storm that darkened the heavens. Her cries echoed through valleys, shaking the hearts of those who heard them. She descended into the lower realms, the deep caverns of death, in a desperate attempt to bring Dumuzi back. There, stripped of her powers, stripped of her adornments, she faced the cold judgment of Ereshkigal. She endured 7 gates of descent, 7 layers of vulnerability. She died. She was revived. She returned, but she did not return whole. When she emerged with a new purpose. Not love, not vengeance, but justice sharpened into something nearly indistinguishable from wrath. She demanded that Marduk pay for the intertwining tragedies that had taken Asar, that had taken Dumuzi, that threatened to ignite the world. The divine council convened. War ignited. Marduk fled. The sacred mountain Ekur became a fortress. Weapons unseen before the flood streaked through the sky like fire tongues of the gods. Humans, swept into the tides of divine conflict, found themselves soldiers in battles they barely understood. The world, still too young to bear such storms, trembled at the brink of another apocalypse. And through it all, destiny tightened its grip on gods and mortals alike, preparing the next turn of a story that refused to end. Because the world, once remade by water, was now being reshaped by fire, ambition, betrayal, and the will of beings who could not escape the shadows of their own creation. The air over the newborn earth shimmered with the heat of conflict, carrying a hum that felt almost electric, an invisible vibration that crawled across stone, through valleys, up mountains, and into the marrow of every being who walked beneath the still recovering sky. The deluge had wiped the slate clean, but the storm gathering now was not one of water or wind. This was a storm of wills, of ancient wounds and unburied rivalries, of love twisted into vengeance and ambition sharpened into destiny. The gods themselves trembled beneath its weight, though none would ever confess it aloud. At the center of this rising tension stood Marduk, once heir to promise, now cornered by a tangle of accusation, resentment, and fear. The death of Dumuzi had stained everything. Though no direct proof tied Marduk to the tragedy, the shadows that clung to his name grew darker with every whispered rumor. Inanna's grief-blazed fury became a torch that illuminated every slight, every old conflict, every subtle move he had ever made. Her pain made the gods listen. Her rage gave the council urgency, and her iron-willed certainty that Marduk bore responsibility became a weight on his shoulders heavier than any chain forged by mortal or divine hand. But Marduk was not one to flee quietly. His pride burned too fiercely, his vision of destiny too deeply rooted. He slipped into the northern lands, where the great artificial mountain, the Ekur, rose like a divine spear piercing the sky. This was no ordinary structure. It had once been a beacon, a temple, a cosmic machine. It stood as a monument to balance between heaven and earth, aligned with the turning of stars and the breathing rhythm of the planet. But now it became a fortress, a place where Marduk believed he could make his final stand. From the moment he entered the Ekur, its ancient halls hummed to life. Crystals embedded deep within its walls glowed with dormant power. Chambers carved with precision far beyond mortal craftsmanship, awakened as though recognizing the presence of a being fated to alter the very course of their existence. Marduk moved through the corridors like a man walking into the heart of destiny. Every echo of his footsteps felt significant. Every shadow seemed to whisper of possibilities, of triumph or ruin. Outside, Inanna prepared for war. Her skyship, woven of metal and energy, gleamed like a blade as she soared over the plains. The winds spiraled behind her, carrying the low rumble of distant storms. Her heart, once gentle in its devotion, now pulsed like a forge. She had descended into death itself to retrieve Dumuzi, and though she had risen again, something in her remained bound to the underworld's cold grip. Her eyes held fire, but also darkness. Darkness carved from loss and sustained by wrath. When she looked towards the Ekur, she no longer saw a sacred place of communion. She saw a prison, a tomb that would house Marduk once her justice was complete. Enlil supported her pursuit. The Elder Lord, though wary of Inanna's ferocity, believed that Marduk's rebellion threatened not just order, but the very stability of the newly restored world. His voice cut through the debates of the council, reminding the Anunnaki of the chaos that had nearly torn heaven from earth in the years leading to the flood. "We cannot rebuild," he proclaimed, upon ground cracked by treachery. Each word landed like a stone, and though some disagreed, none could deny the undercurrent of truth in his warning. Enki, by contrast, felt the fracture deep in his soul. Marduk was his firstborn, his pride, his challenging mirror. But Enki also understood the grief of Inanna, the exhaustion of the world, and the delicate balance the gods were trying to maintain. He stood between the two storms, one fueled by vengeance, the other by ambition, and felt his heart tugged apart by conflicting loyalties. He pleaded for negotiation, for time, for a path that did not end in war. But time had run out the moment Marduk sealed himself inside the Ekur. Thus began the siege. Inanna arrived first, her skyship casting a shadow across the desert. She landed on the broad stone platform before the Ekur and raised her hand, calling down her weapons of lightning. Bolts streaked toward the fortress, but the crystalline pillars embedded in its structure redirected the energy, scattering it into the sky like shattered stars. The air crackled, and the earth trembled beneath the force of her assault, yet the Ekur held strong, its design crafted in an era when the Anunnaki had wielded knowledge far beyond what most now remembered. Ninurta joined her soon after, riding upon a whirlwind that scattered the sands. Armed with weapons capable of breaking mountainsides, he too struck at the walls. But the fortress repelled him as well, its defenses powered not merely by stone and crystal, but by the very knowledge that the gods themselves had forgotten after the flood. Frustration gnawed at him. Honor demanded action. Pride demanded victory. And yet, the ancient stone refused to yield. Far overhead, Utu, the Sun Lord, joined the conflict. His skyship emitted blinding bursts of concentrated light, beams that could melt metal and crack stone. He swept across the Ekur in broad arcs, unleashing his full fury. The beams struck the apex of the structure and rippled away in shimmering waves of deflection. Energy refracted like water against an unseen shield. Even Utu, radiant in power, felt a shiver of unease. Inside the fortress, Marduk watched. Each strike sent vibrations through the walls, humming like distant thunder. He knew he could not hold out forever, not against the full might of heaven. But he also knew he would not surrender. Pride, destiny, fear, and fury intertwined inside him. To surrender would mean dishonor, humiliation, exile, perhaps even death. He believed he was meant for more. He believed he was the rightful heir to a legacy denied him. And so he remained inside the Ekur, gazing at the glowing walls, waiting for fate to show its hand. The battles intensified. Weapons of sound shattered rocks around the base of the mountain. Storms conjured by divine will swept across the plains. Energy beams sliced through the air like blades of pure light. The Ekur became a blazing beacon in the night, illuminated by the ongoing siege. Humans in nearby valleys looked toward the horizon in terror, believing the gods were tearing the world apart again. Mothers clutched their children. Elders prayed. Young warriors took to the mountains, uncertain whether they would soon be swept into the conflict themselves. Enki could bear it no longer. He sought out Ninharsag, the peacemaker, the motherly figure whose wisdom had once bridged the divide between rival clans. Her presence alone had soothed storms, both literal and divine. He begged her to intervene, to speak reason into hearts burning with rage, to remind the council of the consequences of divine blood spilled in anger. Ninharsag listened, her face carved from sorrow. She loved Marduk as she loved all the children of the Anunnaki. She knew Inanna's grief. She knew Enlil's fear, and she knew the fragile state of the earth, still too raw from the wounds of the flood to survive another cataclysm. She arrived at the siege not as a warrior, but as a mediator, cloaked not in armor, but in a robe woven with symbols of peace older than the gods themselves. When she approached the Ekur, the assaults slowed. Even Inanna hesitated. The winds softened. The energy beams dimmed. The cracked earth seemed to exhale in relief. Ninharsag raised her hands and demanded parley. Her voice carried across the battlefield, stronger than thunder, gentler than rain. "Marduk will not die," she declared. "His fate is exile, not execution." Inanna's eyes darkened, flames flickering behind them. "He took Dumuzi from me," she whispered, a tremor shaking her elegant frame. "He must pay for what was taken." Ninharsag placed a hand over her heart. "Loss is a wound no justice can mend, but vengeance will not heal the world. It will break it again." Enlil stepped forward, stiff-backed, jaw set, but he nodded. Even he recognized the truth in her words. The world was fragile. The gods were fractured. Another act of wrath would spin them all toward ruin. The council agreed. Marduk would be spared, but banished to the distant land of no return, where he could no longer stir the conflicts that threatened to consume the world. His line would endure through his son, Nabu, but his influence would be severed. Now came the challenge, reaching him. The Ekur's defenses remained impenetrable. Only one among them, Ningishida, master of hidden knowledge, architect of its most intricate mechanisms, knew how to breach its walls without destroying its heart. He stepped forward, calm and deliberate. With tools forged of resonance and precision, he guided a team to carve a secret tunnel beneath the structure. The work was delicate. One mistake could collapse the entire fortress. But Ningishida moved with certainty. He understood the language of stone. He felt the pulse of the ancient energy lines woven through the halls. Days passed as the siege paused. The gods waited. Humans watched from afar, sensing a turning point. Finally, they broke through. A chamber opened beneath the Ekur's upper levels, a chamber where Marduk lay weakened, starved of air and strength, but alive. His eyes opened as the light filtered through the carved passage. His first words were not gratitude, but defiance. "I will not yield my birthright." But when Nabu, his son, was placed into his arms, and when Sarpunit, his wife, pleaded for his life, the fire in him softened just enough to let fate in. He bowed his head. He accepted exile. The gods led him across the desert, past the lands where rivers curled like serpents through valleys, still wet from the receding waters. They crossed mountains, plains, and ancient ruins newly exposed by the flood. And when they reached the distant, barren land, they released him there, far from cities, far from sacred centers, far from the echoes of the council's power. Marduk stood silently, watching the gods depart, knowing that though he lived, he had lost everything he believed was his. But in the dry wind that swept across the land of no return, a whisper moved. This is not the end, for destiny does not die when buried. It waits. And the world, still young, still trembling, felt the subtle shift of a future unformed, waiting like a distant storm on the horizon, ready to shape the ages to come. In the age that followed Marduk's exile, the world exhaled slowly, as if relieved to have avoided another divine cataclysm. Yet beneath that relief lingered a tremor, a faint, pulsing uncertainty that rippled through the veins of the recovering earth, like an echo of a future the world did not yet understand. The gods, exhausted from conflict and divided by wounds that had not fully healed, tried to settle back into the roles they had carved for themselves. And the humans, unaware of the full complexity of the celestial drama shaping their destinies, continued their slow climb toward rebuilding civilization, carrying both gratitude and quiet fear toward the sky. The deserts shimmered with heat during the day and cooled sharply at night. Grasses took root in the valleys. Rivers carved new deltas. Villages emerged from the mud like promises. Stone by stone, reed by reed, the children of Ziusudra spread across the fertile patches of earth that had survived the deluge. They planted barley in fields renewed by silt. They tamed the new livestock that had repopulated the hills. They shaped clay into symbols and vessels, beginning the long process of memory-making, carving stories into tablets as if trying to anchor themselves against the vast forgetting that had swallowed the world whole. Inanna, though victorious in her pursuit of justice, remained restless. Her grief for Dumuzi clung to her like a shadow. She wore it not with weakness, but with the fierce pride of one who had faced death and returned. She threw herself into overseeing the rebuilding efforts, guiding humans in matters of craft, fertility, and protection. Her presence became a beacon, both feared and worshipped. Women prayed to her for strength in childbirth. Warriors carved her emblem onto their weapons. Lovers whispered her name beneath moonlight, hoping for the kind of passion she once embodied. Yet each night, when she was alone in her sky palace, the silence pressed in, reminding her that even divine victories could not fill the shape of what had been lost. Enki withdrew from the center of conflict, retreating to his watery domain, where canals shimmered like veins of silver across the landscape. He busied himself with teaching, shaping the early minds of humanity, giving them tools of survival rather than dominion. He taught them the secrets of irrigation, showing them how to coax water from reluctant ground. He taught them healing through herbs and minerals. He taught them how to read the cycles of the moon, how to weave cloth, how to store grain for seasons of drought. His compassion became a quiet foundation beneath the rising world. Enlil, ever stern, took a different path. He reasserted order through law and ritual, placing boundaries on the territories of humans and gods alike. Under his guidance, new temples rose, centers of worship, but also hubs of organization where crops were recorded, herds counted, and seasons calculated. He believed that only through strict structure could humanity avoid descending into chaos. To him, the flood had been a necessary correction, and the world needed guardians who would ensure that such a correction would never again be required. His servants, the priest-kings, enforced rules with a firm hand, claiming divine authority to oversee the farming lands spreading across the plains. But even as fields flourished and temples gleamed beneath the waxing sun, murmurs of unease began to weave themselves into the fabric of the land. For though Marduk had been banished, his story did not end in exile. The gods had hoped that distance would extinguish his influence. Instead, it transformed him. The barren land to which he had been banished, harsh, sun-scorched, unforgiving, became a crucible. In solitude, Surrounded by vast emptiness, Marduk's pride did not wither. It hardened. His defeat turned into a vow. Every grain of sand beneath his feet became a reminder of what had been taken from him. Every night, sky he gazed upon became a map of paths still waiting to be claimed. He began gathering followers again, not through force, but through whispers. Wanderers who crossed the barren lands found him not as a broken exile, but as a living myth. A radiant, towering figure who spoke of destiny, justice, and a world reordered according to a vision older than the flood itself. These wanderers carried his words back to the villages and cities, growing on the far side of the world. His name, once feared, then forbidden, began to return to human tongues like a spark catching on dry wood. Some spoke it with hope, others with caution, others with dread. Nabu, Marduk's son, grew into a figure of serene intelligence, quiet where his father was fiery, patient where his father was ambitious. He became known as a scribe, a keeper of memory, a guardian of the secret knowledge the gods had once guarded jealously. His presence softened the harshness of Marduk's exile. Among the wandering tribes who lived in the fringes of the settled world, Nabu taught them how to write, turning spoken stories into symbols that could endure when memory failed. These tribes, who lived far from the influence of Enlil's priest kings, began to see Marduk not as a rebel, but as a god of wisdom unjustly cast aside. Meanwhile, in the lands governed by the Enlilites, a new generation of humans began to rise. Children whose grandparents had survived the flood. They grew up hearing only fragments of what had happened. The stories they were told shaped a world where the gods were distant, powerful, and demanding. These children learned of the heavens not as a place of guidance, but of authority. Priests spoke of the flood as punishment for humanity's mistakes, teaching obedience through fear. But there were other stories, too, ones whispered at night by old shepherds, ones carried across valleys by travelers who had passed through the barren lands. These stories spoke of a god who had challenged the council, who had stood alone against the judgment that drowned the world, who had refused to kneel even when the heavens themselves turned against him. These stories gave shape to a kind of defiance, a seed of rebellion, a sense that freedom might be found not through obedience, but through remembering the truths the priest-kings tried to forget. Inanna sensed this shifting undercurrent. From her palace atop the mountains, she watched as the world split into lines that were not yet visible on maps, but were unmistakable in spirit. She saw the way people hesitated when naming their gods. She saw the way young warriors carved symbols that belonged not to the Enlilites, but to the lineage of Marduk. She saw the way the wind carried Nabu's teachings like pollen, settling on fertile minds that hungered for knowledge not sanctioned by the ruling order. And she felt a chill. The deluge had taught her that the world could break. Now she feared the world could burn. To prevent this, she threw herself into strengthening alliances among the gods. She sought out Utu, the radiant lord of justice, appealing to his sense of fairness. She visited Ninurta, reminding him of the oath to protect balance, not tyranny. She even approached Enki, her former adversary, in grief, urging him to rein in his son before rebellion spread across the continents like wildfire. Enki listened, sorrow flickering behind his calm exterior. He had always known that Marduk's destiny was too large to contain. But he also knew that the world wasn't ready for what Marduk believed was his rightful ascension. While gods maneuvered, humanity continued to evolve. Cities formed, small at first, then larger. Mud brick houses multiplied along riverbanks. Markets emerged where farmers traded barley for fish, where shepherds exchanged wool for pottery, where wanderers offered stories in return for bread. Children chased each other through narrow streets. Artisans carved intricate patterns into clay tablets. Singers composed hymns to the gods, mixing truth with myth as casually as mixing mud with water. Life expanded, thrived, wove itself into structures so rich that even the gods watched with awe. But beneath these rising cities, something stirred in the depths of the earth. It began with tremors, small at first, then stronger. Priests claimed they were signs of divine displeasure, but Enki knew better. He felt the tremors deep within the planetary core, sensed the shifting energies beneath the crust. He realized that the deluge had done more than reshape the land. It had awakened forces long dormant, geological, magnetic, and spiritual. The world was entering a phase of renewal, but also instability. And instability is the soil in which ambition grows. In the barren lands, Marduk prepared. He built a sanctuary carved into red rock cliffs, its entrance hidden behind cascading sands. Inside, torches glowed with blue flame. Maps etched into the walls showed star paths, cycles of time, and diagrams of cosmic movements known only to the most ancient of the gods. Marduk studied them for hours, sometimes days, seeing in them patterns that even the council had forgotten. He understood something the others refused to admit. The world was entering a new age, an age in which humanity would no longer remain obedient servants. They would seek knowledge, independence, power, and if any god guided them into this new age, Marduk believed it should be him. He found supporters not only among humans, but among lesser gods and semi-divine beings scattered across the earth. Some had felt overshadowed by Enlil's dominance. Some resented the priest-kings. Some simply admired Marduk's unbowing spirit. All became threads in a growing tapestry of rebellion. When word of these alliances reached Inanna, she felt a familiar fire kindle inside her. She knew what happened when gods let pride override balance. She had watched it drown the world once. She had no intention of letting it happen again. She rallied the Enlilites, prepared her armies, and strengthened defenses around the sacred centers. The world, still young, began to feel the pull of two destinies, one carved by order, one forged by ambition, one shaped by memory of the deluge, one driven by dreams of a different future. As tensions grew, strange omens appeared in the sky. A red star flared unexpectedly, glowing brighter than any other. Birds migrated in unusual patterns. The great river split into two channels as if confused. Priests declared these signs of war among the gods. Farmers whispered of an era of change. Wanderers claimed the world was preparing for something vast and irreversible. They were all right, for in the depths of Marduk's sanctuary, beneath the flickering blue flames and the carved star maps, he discovered a pattern. A cosmic alignment that would come only once in many ages. An alignment powerful enough to tilt the balance of divine authority. An alignment that, if harnessed, could place him at the center of a new cosmic order. This knowledge ignited a fire that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with destiny. The storm that had been rumbling in silence began at last to gather its thunder. And the world, which had barely survived one reset, now felt the tremor of another approaching. This one not from the sky or the sea, but from the hearts of the gods themselves and the fragile ambitions of the humans who walked beneath them. The world had begun to breathe with a strange, anticipatory rhythm, as if every mountain ridge, every shifting river, every trembling root sensed that the fragile balance holding heaven and earth together was thinning. In the villages, shepherds noticed their flocks staring towards the horizon at night, as though watching some invisible procession in the dark. Fishermen along the riverbanks paused mid-net pull when sudden gusts of wind rose and vanished without warning. Children woke from dreams of giant shadows stretching across the sky. Even the priests, who tried to dismiss these things as mundane, found themselves glancing upward more often than they wished, unsure what they were expecting to see. The gods, too, felt the shift. Though they cloaked themselves in appearance, in ceremonial armor, in ancient authority, the truth moved like cold water beneath their skin. Another turning point was approaching, one that the deluge had merely delayed rather than prevented. At the center of this gathering storm, Marduk continued to shape a destiny forged in isolation. His sanctuary, carved into red rock cliffs, had become a nexus of forbidden learning and revived memory. Wanderers came to him speaking dozens of dialects, carrying stories of strange stars overhead, of lightning that struck without clouds, of trembling earth that seemed to pulse with intention. Marduk listened to every rumor, tracing them onto the star maps etched across his walls. He saw patterns emerging, patterns that mirrored cycles the ancient records described, cycles of returning planets, of cosmic gates opening, of alignments that shifted the balance of power between worlds. It was during one of these nights, beneath a sky streaked with unfamiliar hues, that Nabu approached his father with a tablet he had crafted from polished obsidian. Etched upon it were calculations so precise that they glimmered faintly, even without light. "The alignment is drawing near," Nabu said, his voice calm but edged with something deeper, urgency, perhaps, or awe. "When the red star reaches its zenith, the paths between realms will open. Those who stand prepared may claim authority. Those who do not will lose it." Marduk traced the lines of the tablet with a finger, feeling their resonance. "The council knows nothing of this," he murmured, half to himself. "They dismissed the old records," Nabu replied, "but exile allowed us to study what they forgot." A slow, fierce smile spread across Marduk's face, not the smile of a conqueror, but of a man who had found proof that destiny had not abandoned him. "Then the world will be reshaped," he whispered, "but not by their hand, by mine." Behind him, blue flames flickered along the sanctuary walls. The symbols carved into the rock pulsed like a heartbeat. But far from the barren lands of his exile, Inanna stood atop her sky palace, gazing at that same red star. Her hair lifted in the wind like a banner woven from gold and midnight. She felt the star's approach not as an opportunity, but as a threat, one that shimmered with the same energy she had felt during the days leading to the deluge. The wind spoke warnings she could not ignore. When she closed her eyes, she saw Dumuzi's face, smiling, fading, swallowed again by water and darkness. She opened her eyes and whispered, "I will not let the world fall again." Driven by that vow, she summoned her commanders. Her armies, celestial and human, began assembling on the plains beneath her palace. Warbirds, sleek skyships shaped like predatory eagles, lined the stone terraces. Warriors tightened the straps of their armor. Priests chanted hymns meant to strengthen the heart and steady the hands of those about to face forces beyond comprehension. Inanna walked among them, touching shoulders, blessing weapons, speaking softly to those who trembled. To them she was not merely a goddess. She was hope forged into form. Fierce, unyielding, luminous. Yet even in her resolute preparation, doubt crept into the shadows of her heart. Not doubt of her purpose, but doubt of the path. She remembered the last great conflict, how it had torn her apart from within. She remembered the desperation that drove her into the underworld, the cold fingers of death around her throat, the terrifying stillness before she rose again. If this coming battle echoed the past, what price would she pay this time? What would she lose that she had not already given? Enlil, meanwhile, felt the approach of the alignment with growing agitation. He knew the signs. His ancestors had lived through such shifts. Cosmic alignments were not merely astronomical curiosities. They were turning points in the laws that governed power. Positions could be lost, thrones could crumble, authority could shift, and Marduk, armed now with knowledge from forgotten ages, represented a threat too dangerous to ignore. Enlil summoned the council. The great chamber filled with the hum of divine voices, layered with tension. Utu arrived cloaked in radiant light. Ninurta stepped in with the calm focus of a warrior who had accepted the inevitability of conflict. Ninharsag, weary but resolute, took her place with the quiet force of a mother guarding her children. Enki arrived last, his expression unreadable, carrying the weight of all sides of the conflict. "We must move against him before the alignment," Enlil declared. "If he harnesses its power, the consequences will ripple across both worlds." The chamber stirred. Some nodded. Others hesitated. Enki's voice broke the murmuring. "Destroying him will break the earth. His exile was punishment enough. If we provoke him now—" "His ambition provokes us," Inanna snapped, stepping into the chamber like a storm given form. "He intends to use the alignment to seize dominion. I feel it in the wind. I see it in the stars. If we do nothing, we hand him the world." Her words carried an intensity that made silence fall. But not all agreed. Ningishzida, keeper of hidden wisdom, spoke softly. "The alignment can amplify power, yes, but it can also amplify consequences. If we fight him during the cosmic turning, the forces unleashed may be greater than any of us can predict." Enlil's jaw tightened. "Then we act before the turning begins." But there was no time. Already the red star climbed higher, its light staining the night with a deeper crimson. It moved faster than celestial law should allow, as though drawn by unseen hands. In the barren sanctuary, Marduk sensed it too. He stood outside beneath the vast sky, arms outstretched, eyes blazing with reflected flame. The air around him rippled. Sands lifted from the ground and spiraled upward. The stars overhead blinked like watching eyes. "Father of the ages," he whispered into the wind, "grant me what was denied. Let this be the rise of the destined one." Behind him, his followers knelt, not out of fear but out of belief, out of the electrifying certainty that they were witnessing the birth of a new age. The alignment began. A red star ignited the night. A pale moon trembled. The constellations shifted position as though dragged along unseen tracks. Earth itself seemed to inhale. In that instant, every divine being felt the veil between realms thin. Humans felt it too, even those who did not understand. Babies woke crying. Elders clutched their chests. Hunters paused mid-step, sensing invisible pressure in their bones. Dogs howled toward the sky. Rivers surged against their banks. The gods reacted. Inanna mounted her skyship, the engines roaring with blinding light as she shot into the heavens. Ninurta followed, riding a chariot of roaring storm winds. Utu rose like a second sun, illuminating the sky with gold. In the sanctuary, Marduk lifted a sphere of glowing metal, an ancient artifact older than the deluge, older than their arrival on Earth. Its surface swirled with constellations. As he raised it, the red star above flickered, responding like a bowstring pulled taut. But the world began to crack. At first, the cracks were invisible. Tiny shifts in pressure, faint tremors beneath the crust, shimmering distortions in the air. Then they grew. The skies trembled with streaks of electric light. Mountains groaned. Lakes surged as if pushed by unseen tides. Enki felt it first. He had always been attuned to the Earth's heartbeat. Now that heartbeat grew erratic, stumbling and racing and stumbling again. If the gods unleashed their full power during the alignment, the planet would fracture, creating earthquakes, floods, storms that would make the Great Deluge seem like a single raindrop. "Marduk must be stopped," Enlil shouted in the sky chambers. "Or the earth will break," Ningishzida warned. "No," Enki whispered. "If we fight him now, we break the world ourselves." But Inanna's course was already set. She streaked across the sky, her weapons igniting like comets. The glare illuminated the barren lands as she approached Marduk. Below, the sand swirled in violent spirals. The sanctuary glowed from within, its walls seeming to vibrate with the same energy that pulsed through the red star overhead. Marduk saw her skyship descending. His eyes narrowed. "So it begins." Beam met beam, light met light, power collided with power. The resulting shockwave tore across the desert, flattening dunes, uprooting ancient stones, sending followers tumbling in all directions. The sky flashed white. Thunder roared without clouds. The earth itself arched upward like a living creature recoiling from pain. The battle had begun. Inanna unleashed her fury. Blinding arcs of energy cut through the sky. Marduk countered with resonant waves that twisted the air into spirals. Ninurta descended, hurling projectiles forged from meteorite metal. Marduk struck them down with precision, each explosion lighting the sky in violent bursts. Lightning ripped downward. Sand boiled. The air screamed. But with every blow exchanged, the earth groaned louder. The alignment amplified everything: power, anger, consequences. Cracks opened across the barren land like the webbing of shattered glass. Then something unexpected happened. Nabu stepped forward. Not as a warrior, not as a challenger, but as a mediator, calm amidst chaos. "Enough!" His voice rang out, amplified by the alignment itself. The world froze. Energy beams flickered and dissolved. Wind stilled. Even the trembling earth paused, as though holding its breath. Nabu stepped between Inanna and Marduk, his eyes glowing with the same resonance as the red star above. "If you continue," he said, "you will tear the world apart. The alignment magnifies all things, your power, your rage, your grief. If you fight now, you will destroy the very earth you claim to protect or rule." Inanna trembled with fury. "He seeks dominion. He seeks recognition," Nabu said softly. "He seeks a place in a world that cast him out." Marduk bristled. "I seek what is mine by destiny." "And what is destiny?" Nabu asked, "if not shaped by choices?" His words hung in the air. A quiet settled, a heavy, awful quiet filled with the weight of cycles older than memory. Slowly, the energy weaving through the alignment began to ebb. The red star dimmed slightly, The trembling earth steadied, not fully, but enough. Inanna lowered her weapon, not in surrender, but in restraint. Marduk lowered the ancient sphere, though his eyes still burned. The gods gathered across the sky and the desert, exhausted, shaken, forced into stillness by the presence of a sun who spoke with the clarity of truth. The alignment faded. The sky returned to its usual constellations, and as its final light dimmed, the world exhaled, long, trembling, fragile. The war had not happened, but peace had not been restored. For some battles are merely delayed, some destinies merely postponed. And in the shadows of the now quiet land, destiny coiled like a serpent preparing its next strike, waiting for the moment when gods and humans would once again collide on the unpredictable path of history. In the uneasy stillness that followed the fading alignment, the world felt as though it were holding its breath, caught between the memory of a catastrophe that had almost happened and the unspoken fear of the one that might still come. The sands of the barren lands settled slowly, but their unrest seemed to echo the unrest in the hearts of gods and humans alike. The sky, which had moments earlier blazed with violent currents of divine power, now lay pale and hollow, as if drained from witnessing the struggle. Even the stars dimmed for several nights, as though they were reluctant to look down upon the beings who had come so dangerously close to tearing the world apart again. But something else lingered in the air, something subtler than wind, weightier than silence, a shift, a rearrangement in the unspoken agreements that had bound the Anunnaki since the flood. A new tension, not shaped by immediate conflict, but by the haunting question that pressed itself into every divine mind. What happens next? For though the alignment had passed without destroying the earth, it had revealed something impossible to ignore. The world had entered a new era. The cosmic order had shifted. Power no longer moved along the same currents. And with those changes came consequences, ones that none of the gods, not even the eldest among them, fully understood yet. Across the plains, Inanna returned to her palace in the mountains. Her armor carried scorch marks from battle, and her hair still shimmered with residual sparks of celestial fire. But it was her eyes that told the true story. Their glow had dimmed from fury to contemplation. She had been prepared to kill Marduk, prepared to die if necessary, prepared to unleash everything she had bottled since Dumuzi's death. But Nabu's intervention, calm, unyielding, illuminated by cosmic truth rather than emotion, had forced her into stillness. As she entered the Sky Palace, her servants approached, bowing deeply, but she dismissed them with a wave. She did not want ceremony. She did not want comfort. She wanted clarity. She climbed the highest terrace, stepping into the cold wind, and stared at the horizon long after the sun had dissolved into dusk. She wondered whether fate had denied her justice or spared her from destroying something she could never repair. She wondered if her own grief had blinded her to the fragility of the world she swore to protect, and she wondered whether the gods themselves were still suited to rule, or if the world was slowly shifting beyond even their grasp. In the heart of the Enlilite stronghold, Enlil stood before the great mosaic that depicted the arrival of the Anunnaki in ages far beyond human recollection. Torchlight flickered across the tiles, casting movements of shadow that made the ancient scene look alive. He narrowed his eyes at the image of himself, a younger, fiercer version wielding authority without hesitation. Was that version of him still the one guiding the world now? Or had the flood, the war, the betrayal, and the fracture of the alignment carved too many cracks into his purpose? He summoned Ninurta, who arrived with a quiet stride. The warrior god stood tall, posture straight, eyes steady, not with arrogance, but with the unwavering certainty of a protector. Enlil studied him with something almost like sadness. Ninurta had always been the one he relied on, the one whose loyalty never wavered, the one who absorbed the burden of enforcing order without complaint. But now even Ninurta's gaze flickered with doubt. "The world trembles, Father," Ninurta said softly, "not from enemies, but from too many masters." Enlil nodded. "And masters who see only their own visions. Visions that collide with the truth of the earth," Ninurta added. "And with each other." Enlil clasped his hands behind his back, staring again at the mosaic. The flood ended one age. This alignment has ended another. What rises now will determine whether we guide this world or merely watch it unravel. He did not speak Marduk's name. He did not have to. Ninurta bowed and left, but his mind churned with the same question pressing itself into every corner of the heavens. Would this next age be shaped by divine hands, or broken by them? Far from the mountain palaces and star-lit chambers, Enki walked along the banks of a river newly carved by post-deluge waters. He stepped barefoot, letting the mud cool his skin, feeling the pulse of the currents through his soles. Nights spent studying the trembling earth and shifts in the magnetic fields had carved deep lines of concern into his face, though he tried to hide them from others. His heart ached with the weight of divided loyalties. He had helped create humanity. He had built the foundations of their civilizations. He had guided, protected, nurtured. And yet his own son now stood at the center of a conflict that threatened to poison the world. He looked up at the stars, remembering the days when they had first arrived on this planet. Brilliant, young, full of certainty. They had believed they could mold this world into a reflection of their own without consequence. But the earth had its own spirit, its own will, its own laws. And now, after the great flood and the near war during the alignment, that spirit felt restless. Enki placed his hand on the water and whispered a prayer, not to gods, not to kings, but to the planet itself. "Hold steady," he murmured. "Forgive our arrogance. Give us time to mend." The river shimmered in response, not with magic, but with a quiet ripple of wind that made Enki's eyes soften. Whether it was the earth answering or simply coincidence did not matter. In that moment, he felt the gravity of the world pressing against his heart. Meanwhile, in the barren lands of exile, Marduk walked among his followers with renewed intensity. The events of the alignment had changed him, not in humility, as some of the council had hoped, but in clarity. He had tasted the edge of destiny and seen how close he had come to grasping it. The power had been real, palpable, molten like fire beneath the skin. And it had awakened something in him that could not be forgotten. His sanctuary pulsed with new energy. The carvings on the walls glowed faintly at night. The air crackled with a resonance reminiscent of the alignment's final moments. His followers felt it too. Even the ground beneath the sanctuary hummed, as though ancient forces were shifting beneath the surface, awakening in response to Marduk's rising influence. Nabu, calm and contemplative, remained at his father's side, yet his expression carried a weight more complex than devotion. He understood the magnitude of what had happened, but he also saw the danger. The alignment had shown that the world was now incredibly sensitive to divine conflict. A war between gods would no longer simply change boundaries or leadership. It could tear the fabric of the planet itself. "Father," Nabu said one evening, "the alignment faded, but its fractures remain. We walk on the edge of something fragile." Marduk placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Fragility creates opportunity," he replied. "Opportunity creates destiny." "Or destruction," Nabu said quietly. Marduk's gaze hardened. "Not if destiny is guided by strength." Nabu lowered his eyes, understanding the inevitable truth. Marduk would never bow, never yield, never let the world move without him shaping its course. And so, as Marduk expanded his influence across the barren lands, humans began drifting into his orbit. Some were refugees fleeing Enlilite strictness. Others were wanderers drawn by tales of a radiant god who listened rather than commanded. Still others came seeking knowledge, knowledge forbidden in the cities that worshipped the Enlilites. Marduk welcomed them all. He taught them star lore, metals, architecture. He shared with them the ancient rites of Nibiru. He gave them symbols to carve into their banners and tattoos to brand upon their skin. Soon, his sanctuary was no longer a place of exile. It was a capital, a growing civilization, a rival to the cities under Enlil's command. As the divide between the divine factions widened, so too did the divide among humans. Traders carried stories from city to city, stories of Marduk's teachings, of Inanna's armies, of Enlil's warnings, of strange movements in the sky. Every village, every market, every gathering began to feel the pull of two opposing future paths. One path promised order, structure, tradition. The other promised change, knowledge, empowerment. And the earth itself trembled, not from any physical force, but from the sheer weight of choice pressing down upon the world. In the midst of this growing divide, an unexpected omen appeared. It began with a sound, a low, resonant hum emanating from the depths of the earth. Shepherds heard it through their feet, farmers felt it through their plows, children sensed it in their bones. The hum grew in intensity over days, rising and falling like a heartbeat too deep for human ears to comprehend. Birds flew in strange formations. Fish leapt from the water without reason. Desert sands shifted into spirals overnight. Enki recognized the sound first. His heart clenched as he placed his palm against the ground and felt the unmistakable vibration. It was the same frequency the world had emitted before the deluge, but this time it was different, less destructive, more unstable, as though the earth was not breaking but struggling to hold itself together. He traveled quickly to the council chambers, urgency burning through every step. The gods gathered, Inanna tense and alert, Enlil cold and resolute, Ninurta leaning forward like a warrior waiting for orders, Ninharsag weary and sorrowful, Utu holding calm, but troubled light. Enki faced them with a voice heavy with warning. "The planet is reacting to us," he said, "to our divisions, to our conflict, to our ambitions. The alignment amplified every imbalance. If we continue along this path, the earth will not drown this time. It will fracture." Silence struck the chamber like a blow. Inanna clenched her fists. Enlil's expression turned to stone. Ninurta's jaw tightened. "We must choose a course," Ninharsag whispered, "or the planet will choose for us." Enlil spoke first. "We must crush rebellion before it grows." Inanna agreed. Marduk prepares for something vast. If we do nothing, Enki cut her off. If we fight him, the world will break. Utu stepped forward. Then we must find a new way, a path neither battle nor surrender. But such a path required something no one in that chamber wanted to admit. The gods were losing control. Outside, the earth hummed again. Longer, louder, deeper. The world was speaking, warning, begging, preparing. And in that heavy, uncertain moment, the fragile veil between destiny and disaster thinned once more, setting the stage for a confrontation far greater than the alignment, far more dangerous than the deluge, and far more defining than any war the gods had yet waged. For the next turning point was coming, and this time it would not wait for them to be ready. The trembling of the earth grew stronger in the weeks that followed, no longer a distant hum, but a living pulse, resonating through soil, stone, and bone. It was as if the planet itself had become a drum stretched too tightly, each divine argument, each clash of ambition, each division between gods and humans striking its surface in vibrating blows that rippled across continents. Farmers felt their fields quiver beneath their bare feet. Hunters paused as animals lifted their heads in unison, sensing something deep and ancient stirring beneath the crust. Even the riverbanks seemed to breathe unnaturally, rising and falling in subtle tides unrelated to the moon. The world was no longer steady. It was responding. The gods watched these signs from their high palaces, their mountain fortresses, their cloud-hung platforms. Some believed the trembling to be a warning of imminent catastrophe. Others saw it as a sign that the age was shifting toward a new cosmic balance, one that might favor or destroy their ambitions. All felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down like a hand closing around the throat of destiny. Enki, more attuned to the heartbeat of the earth than any other, sensed the danger with an intensity that made sleep elusive. He walked the length of rivers, placing his hands into the currents as though listening for the whispers carried from distant lands. He pressed his ear to stone walls, interpreting the vibrations that traveled through them like messages encoded by forces older than the gods. These signals filled him with dread. The world was not simply reacting to conflict. It was weakening. The alignment had opened cosmic channels that had not fully closed, leaving the fabric of reality thinner, more fragile, prone to tearing. He summoned Ninharsag, the life-bearer, the healer of gods and earth alike. Together they journeyed into caverns beneath the mountains where crystalline formations glowed with faint pulses of planetary energy. The crystals flickered erratically, their usual rhythm disrupted. Ninharsag placed her hands upon them, her face tightening as she felt the strain within their luminous cores. "The earth is exhausted," she said softly. "It is not meant to withstand another great upheaval." "It may not be a matter of choice," Enki replied. "Fate is closing around us." Meanwhile, far to the east, in the barren lands where Marduk had built his hidden sanctuary, followers gathered in growing numbers. Their encampments spread outward like roots of a vast, unseen tree. Fires burned at night, revealing silhouettes of wanderers, scholars, warriors, and displaced families drawn by the promise of a future different from the one offered by Enlil's rigid priest-kings. They listened to Marduk's teachings with breathless attention, absorbing every word. But beneath the teachings lay something more potent, a vision. Marduk spoke of a world no longer bound by the old order, one where humans walked alongside gods as partners rather than servants. He spoke of knowledge hidden by the council, knowledge buried in the debris of pre-deluge cities, knowledge inscribed in the stars themselves. He taught them to look not upward in fear, but forward in ambition. His followers believed he was destined to lead them into a new age. Yet Nabu, watching from the shadows of the sanctuary, saw something his father either ignored or refused to see. The tremors in the earth grew stronger each time Marduk stood before the people, each time he invoked destiny, each time he drove his own power deeper into the cracks of the world. The alignment had awakened something inside Marduk, an amplification of authority that now resonated outward, interacting with the weakened fabric of the planet. After one such gathering, Nabu approached him. "The world reacts to you," he said quietly. "To all of us. We must tread lightly." Marduk turned to him with a gaze forged from fire and resolve. "If the world trembles, then it prepares to be reshaped." Nabu felt the weight of destiny bearing down on him, as if urging him to intervene, to mediate once more. Yet he knew that words alone would not be enough this time. Too many currents were converging. Too many paths were narrowing into a single, unavoidable crossroads. Inanna sensed that crossroads as well. She stood upon the highest terrace of her palace, watching the distant horizon shift beneath strange waves of heat. The world looked distorted, as if viewed through ripples of boiling water. Her priests approached her with trembling voices, reporting visions, omens, dreams of burning skies and collapsing cities. She dismissed none of them. She knew how quickly divine signs could transform into reality. She consulted oracles, deciphered star patterns, invoked ancient rites meant to reveal truth. One such rite showed her an image that sent a shiver down her spine, a serpent of fire winding through the heavens, its path cutting across the domains of gods and men alike. At the serpent's head was a burning eye, a symbol that had appeared only once before in the annals of the Anunnaki. The eye of the dragon, the sign of dominion. An omen linked not merely to power, but to the rise of a ruling force whose ascension would change the fates of all realms. Inanna closed her eyes and whispered, "Marduk." Meanwhile, Enlil's priests reported that the ziggurat temples, cosmic instruments aligned with the heavens, had begun resonating with an unfamiliar frequency. Their stones vibrated softly, humming in the night. Torches flickered even when shielded from wind. Water stored in ceremonial basins quivered as though stirred by unseen hands. Enlil himself, descending into the central chamber of his great temple, felt the vibrations underfoot. He placed his hand upon the polished floor, feeling a resonance that seemed both familiar and foreign. The last time he had felt such a vibration was before the deluge, when the ancient powers of the planet and the heavens collided. He summoned Ninurta. "We cannot let the world slip from our grasp. If Marduk continues on this path, he will unravel the order we built after the flood." Ninurta nodded. "Then we must stop him before he claims the power he seeks." Enlil's jaw tightened. "Not with war. War now will break the earth. We must cut off his influence, sever the roots of his following, contain him before he ignites another cosmic shift." But containment required more than soldiers. It required a battle of symbols, stories, and the hearts of humans, beings who increasingly found themselves torn between the visions of Marduk and the order of Enlil. Enki felt that divide as keenly as he felt the tremors beneath the soil. He walked among human settlements, watching how their eyes lit with hope when Marduk's name was whispered. He watched how other eyes darkened with fear at the mention of Enlil's decrees. Humanity stood poised between two destinies, and Enki feared that either would tear the world apart. During his journeys, he encountered an elderly shepherd sitting alone beneath a tree, staring at the trembling earth. The man spoke with the clarity of someone who had lived long enough to see patterns repeat. "The gods argue," he said without looking at Enki, "and the earth listens. She listens too closely." Enki sat beside him. "What do you feel?" "That the world is tired. That it cannot bear another great weight. That the gods must either mend their quarrels or leave us to mend ourselves." Enki felt a pang, pain mixed with truth. For all their power, the gods had become entangled in their own legacies, forgetting that the world itself had a voice, a limit, a boundary. He returned to the council chambers with new urgency. "We must come together," he told them. "We must create a pact that binds our power, limits our influence, stabilizes the earth." Inanna looked unconvinced. "And leave Marduk free to rise?" "Better one danger than many," Enki replied. "If we divide, the earth breaks. If we unite, we may contain him." Enlil bristled. "Unite with him? With the one who—" "Or fracture everything," Enki cut in, surprising even himself with the sharpness of his voice. "We stand on the edge of another catastrophe, not by water this time, by resonance, by the tearing of realities, by the collapse of the balance between realms." Silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, Ninharsag spoke. "Perhaps," she said, "the age of the gods ruling alone has ended. Perhaps power must be shared, with humans, with the earth, with destiny itself." It was a radical thought, a dangerous one, a necessary one. But even as the gods debated, Marduk acted. He gathered his closest followers and revealed to them an artifact long hidden, an object older than the flood, older than the arrival of the Anunnaki. A sphere carved from a material that shimmered like molten starfire. It pulsed with energy the moment he touched it. "This," he declared, "is the key to the new age." His followers fell to their knees. The artifact responded to his voice with a rising glow. The cavern walls vibrated. Sand began to lift from the ground, suspended in shimmering patterns. Nabu stepped forward, fear flickering behind his calm eyes. "Father, what is this relic doing?" "Awakening," Marduk said, "just as the world awakens to my destiny." But the world was awakening in other ways, too. Earthquakes shook distant cities. Rivers swelled without rain. The sky shimmered with sheets of color at night. Birds migrated in confused spirals. Even the air tasted different. Charged, sharp, metallic. Enki felt the shift immediately. Inanna felt it in her bones. Enlil felt it in the core of his being. The world convulsed in a deep tremor that rolled across continents like a groaning sigh of exhaustion. The temples vibrated violently. Crystals cracked. In the barren sanctuary, the starfire sphere flared with blinding light. Something ancient had awakened. Something that answered not to gods, but to the forces beneath creation itself. The world was changing again. And this time, the choice of who shaped that change would define not just the fate of humans or gods, but the survival of the earth itself. The earth convulsed again, this time not as a tremor or a warning, but as a deep, resonant shudder that rolled across mountains, deserts, and oceans, like the exhale of a giant stirring from ancient sleep. It rippled through the lands of the Enlilites and the growing territories of Marduk's followers. It shook temple foundations, toppled half-built towers, and sent flocks of birds spiraling into the sky in frightened, chaotic swarms. The world's rhythm had changed. The pulse had quickened. Something beneath creation had awakened, and it demanded to be felt. Storm clouds rose where clear skies had rained moments earlier. Rivers surged without rain. Strange lights glimmered along the horizon, shimmering like curtains woven from molten colors. Even the stars seemed to rearrange themselves subtly, as if responding to an invisible hand guiding their positions across the cosmic stage. Everywhere, humans huddled together in fear. Priests whispered litanies. Farmers clutched their children. Travelers rushed to shelter, sensing that the world stood on the edge of a threshold no one had chosen, yet everyone would be forced to cross. Deep in his sanctuary, carved from red cliffs, Marduk stood before the sphere of starfire, now glowing with such intense brilliance that even he had to turn his eyes away at times. Its surface pulsed in time with the Earth's shudder, as though the relic's awakening and the planet's instability were intertwined. His followers knelt at the edge of the chamber, watching in awe as their leader touched the artifact's surface. The glow intensified, filling every crack and shadow with shimmering radiance. "For ages," Marduk said, his voice echoing with an unnatural resonance, "the Council has denied the truth. They have suppressed knowledge. They have hidden the old paths, the old star gates, the old forces that connect heaven and earth. But the alignment has reopened them, and now the earth remembers." The sphere vibrated beneath his palm. Runes carved into its starfire surface flared to life. For a moment the air smelled of burning metal and unknown elements, unfamiliar yet ancient. A silence followed, thick and electric, as if the chamber itself held its breath. Nabu took a cautious step forward. "Father, the relic is not merely amplifying power. It is linking to the planet, and the planet is unstable." Marduk did not remove his hand. "The world must be reshaped before it can be stabilized." "But reshape into what?" Nabu's voice trembled with urgency. "Into a world of your vision, or into chaos neither man nor God can survive." Marduk's eyes flared with a fierce light. "Into a world worthy of our destiny." While the starfire sphere pulsed in the east, the gods of the Enlilite Council gathered once more in their sky chamber. This time, their faces carried not anger or pride, but grim determination. Enlil stood at the center, staring down at the trembling mosaic floor, which rippled as though it were a pool reflecting the turmoil below. "We cannot ignore it any longer," he said. "The earth cries out. Its stability fractures each time Marduk touches that relic." "Then destroy the relic," Inanna responded, stepping into the golden light of the chamber. Enki shook his head. "Destroying it without understanding its function may rupture the remaining planetary balance. That sphere is linked to forces older than our arrival here." Utu's light dimmed slightly. "Then what do we do? If we act rashly, the world breaks. If we do nothing, the world breaks." Ninharsig placed her hand lightly on the trembling mosaic. "We stop fighting. We face the planet's crisis together. Only then can we confront Marduk without tearing the earth apart." But Enlil's gaze hardened. "We cannot unite with him. His pride is too far gone. His ambition threatens every being in this world." Inanna's voice turned to steel. "Whether we unite or not, we must act. Before he initiates a transformation we cannot reverse." The council fell silent. Beyond the palace, humans felt the world's pulse intensify. And though they could not hear the gods' deliberations, they sensed the shift toward conflict or salvation. Enki stood suddenly, energy shifting through him like a current of insight. The others turned as he lifted his gaze. "There is a way," he said, "a way to bind the power of the sphere, contain it, stabilize its link to the world, but it must be done at the source, in the sanctuary itself." Inanna stepped forward without hesitation. "I will go." Enlil scowled. "No, you and Marduk will tear the land apart." "Then send Ninurta," she countered. "Send Utu, send all of us. The world will tear apart if we do nothing." Enlil's silence was a reluctant admission. He could no longer lead through certainty, only necessity. "Inanna," Enki said softly, "if you confront him in anger, the earth will fail." She steadied her breath. "Then I will confront him in truth." Far below the divine chambers, human messengers sprinted through markets calling people indoors. Fishermen dragged boats onto higher ground. In the cities of Enlil, priests lit night-long fires. In the camps of Marduk, warriors formed defensive lines, sensing that a turning point approached. The gods descended in streaks of radiant light. Inanna led them, soaring through clouds that tore open beneath her speed. Ninurta followed riding winds that crackled with power. Utu glowed like a second sun. Ninharsag descended quietly, her presence softening the violent winds. Even Enlil followed, though his pride weighed heavily on his shoulders. And Enki came last, but with purpose, carrying a crystalline staff attuned to the earth's core vibrations. When they reached the barren lands, a shockwave struck them mid-flight. The sky split with lightning that spiraled upward instead of down. Sandstorm vortexes spun in unnatural arcs. The air tasted metallic and electric. The earth groaned beneath their descent. The sphere inside Marduk's sanctuary pulsed brighter than any star in the sky. Inside, Marduk stood before the artifact, breath steady, posture regal, power rolling off him in waves. Nabu stood nearby, torn between duty to his father and fear for the world. When the gods entered the chamber, light flared violently, shimmering across the walls like liquid fire. "Marduk," Inanna said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Stop this before the earth collapses." His laugh was soft, almost sorrowful. "You come not in peace, but in fear. Fear of what I may become. Fear of a world that doesn't need your chains anymore." Enki stepped forward. "This is not about power. It is about the planet. It cannot sustain this resonance. The sphere links directly to—" "I know exactly what it links to," Marduk said. His hand tightened on the artifact. "It links to the path of ascension, to sovereignty, to the throne denied to me." Ninurta stepped between them, ready to strike at a moment's notice. "You risk everything." "I risk nothing," Marduk replied. "The world trembles because it is weak. It needs to be reforged. I will reforge it." The floor cracked beneath their feet. Light shot upward, piercing the ceiling, the sky, the cosmos. The sanctuary shook. The earth howled. The gods braced themselves, knowing the world was seconds away from tearing. And then, Nabu moved. Not as an attacker, not as a defender, but as the one being whose voice had halted the last catastrophe. He stepped between Marduk and the gods, lifting both hands. "Enough!" The word reverberated through the chamber like a bell struck by cosmic fire. The sphere froze in Marduk's grip. The earth's tremor paused. The cracks in the floor held still. Particles of light hung suspended in the air. In that frozen moment, Nabu spoke, not with the voice of a scribe, but with the voice of destiny itself. Father, if you reshape the world now, you will destroy it. If they fight you, they will destroy it. If we continue down this path, there will be no throne, no dominion, no age, only ruin. Marduk's eyes flickered. His breath hitched. The world is meant to be reborn. Yes, Nabu said softly, but rebirth requires balance, not dominance. Enki lowered his staff. Inanna lowered her weapon. Even Enlil stepped back, recognizing the truth in Nabu's words. The sphere pulsed once, twice. Its glow dimmed, not fully, but enough. Marduk's grip loosened. The world exhaled. The sanctuary steadied. Outside, sandstorms dissipated. Winds calmed. Lightning faded from the sky. Humans lifted their head cautiously. Animals stopped fleeing. The trembling eased, though not entirely. The earth still carried deep fractures, but not fatal ones. Marduk stared at the relic, then at Nabu. His voice cracked, not with weakness, but with the weight of an age-long struggle. "What do you propose?" he whispered. Nabu turned to the gods, then to his father. "A new covenant, not of domination, not of fear, but of survival, of balance, a covenant in which the gods withdraw their heavy hand, where humans rise, where power is no longer wielded through force, but through wisdom." Inanna felt the truth of it resonate in her bones. Enki felt relief wash over him. Ninharsag nodded. Enlil resisted, but even he could not deny that his old order was shattering, and that the world demanded something new. Marduk looked out over the room, at the gods who had exiled him, at the sun who had saved him, at the world trembling beneath them all. Slowly, painfully, he released the sphere. Its glow dimmed to a soft heartbeat. The sanctuary quieted. The gods stepped forward as one. The new covenant was formed, not recorded by scribes, not carved in stone, but forged in the trembling air between gods and earth, sealed by the planet's fragile relief. The age of the gods, ruling through fear, ended that night. The age of shared destiny began, not with triumph, but with the trembling hope that the world might yet survive them all. And as dawn broke over the barren lands, casting golden light across cracked earth, the world took its first breath of a future not yet written, its pulse steady, fragile, alive. A world waiting, a world watching, a world ready for the next story.